This is Special Report.
Black holes are one of the strangest things in existence.
Neil Armstrong may have seen extraterrestrials on the moon.
When he spies a discernible shape.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You can deny all the things I've seen, all the things I've discovered, but not for much longer. Because too many others know what's happening out there. And no one, no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Full Spectrum Universe. I am your host, Rob Yox. We are the embattled broadcast from behind enemy lines in the once great state of New York. Welcome to part 8 of Galactical Beginnings. And you're going to say to yourself, Rob, you're going to be talking about the Anunnaki again, man? Yes. Why? Because the Anunnaki are a very, very important part of the dichotomy of the galactical balance, as well as they have so much fluidity with our own history that this galactic history with the Anunnaki and ourselves lines up. We see this, and again, a lot of our ancient texts, our ancient writings, such as the Sumerian tablets. The Sumerian tablets is one of my references, along with a little bit of Sitchin work and many, many other places of where we get this information to create this timeline prime, I'm calling it, right? And what I mean by that is I've taken all of these great works, looked at all the similarities, and found where that similarities were blatantly obvious. And we're using those points of reference to work off of to either dive in a little bit further or figure a little bit more of it out. But, that's what we're doing, right? And that's what we're trying to do is create that timeline prime for the entire galactical history. Again, also, tonight, right after this, Watchers Talk, we'll be putting the link in the chat. We'll be doing the Protocols of Saturn, part 3.1. Part 3 is going to be a couple of parts, or chapter 3. And what's going to happen is we're going to be doing a lot of back-to-back episodes because it's relevant. Now we're getting into our corner of the galaxy or our corner of the universe. And we're figuring out these steps to civilization. We're going to get to civilization and when it begins. Right now, we're still talking about before that. So without any more of the chatter, let's jump into the information because I have 20 some odd slides that I want to go through tonight that are very, very important. Now, this is going to be setting the stage for later events, which is another reason why we're going through this so thoroughly to make sure that we have a better understanding of what's to come, right? When we start going over the in-depth stories. And that's one of the reasons why we also went back and, really, really honed in on certain areas. And this doesn't mean that we're forgetting all about our ancestors and neighbors all the way on the other side of the galaxy. We're going to get there. We're going to run this line a little bit, probably for another episode or two. And then we're going to go back to the greater galaxy as a whole. And then we're going to come back to Earth and where we start to become part of the story, which in turn is going to be extra epic. If I do say so myself, I've gone through all of this information so far. So let's keep going, right? Let's make it full screen so you can all see it. Galactical Beginnings, Part 8, the Anunnaki continued and operations on Earth, right? Operations are Earth operations, so we want to call it. This is where we see the interaction of the Anunnaki with the beings that we already talked about. We're here, the Nackles, the Andromedans, the Octurians, and a couple of other 5th, 6th, and 7th dimensional beings. But let's go with the path. So this episode, we're starting at 450,000 years ago, right? And we all remember Alalu. He was the king, and he was actually the king of Nibiru for a little while until his half-brother or his descendant threw him from the throne. We're going to be talking about Anu later on. Anu fought him, and instead of killing him at the end, he told him that it was time for him to go. So Alulu sped away from Nibiru, and this is where the story starts. So, fleeing the Anunnaki territory in one of the few remaining mining ships, which we talked about last time. Remember, they had the mining ships to go to the asteroid belt and try and mine something that could supplement their atmosphere, right? I mean, we talked about a little bit of what was on those tablets and Sitchin's work, but so this particular vessel was equipped with both lasers and nuclear warheads. For this was one of their ships that had been outfitted to bombing the volcano as well. Remember, they were trying to save and reignite the volcanoes on Nibiru to create an ashy atmosphere, which in turn, Alinin, their sun or their blue dwarf star that lives and resides within that elliptical orbit that they're on, it's creating too much radiation and it's destroying the planet. So they're trying to figure out ways to save the planet. They tried to do nuclear warheads into the volcano. It did not work. So now they have a few of these nuclear warheads, or I call them nuclear warheads because they're advanced technology bombs or weapons that could cause a yield much like a nuclear warhead. So I'm trying to use descriptive, context of what we know. So wanting to put as much distance between himself and his former subjects as possible, he set on a course to the Forbidden Zone. Now, you're probably all like, what the hell is the Forbidden Zone, right? What is the Forbidden Zone? I have no idea what the hell that is. Let's keep going. I'm going to tell you. So the area of our solar system that lays in between the asteroid belt and the sun, it was forbidden because the passage through the hammered bracelet or the asteroid belt was so perilous. So they saw our portion of the solar system as the Forbidden Zone, Mars, Earth, Venus, that kind of stuff. Really crazy to me. I mean, this is where we live, but to them, their orbit, remember, started all the way at Sirius and comes all the way back around. So this is sort of an outskirt for them, right? So basically during the flight, Alulu, he kept records of his impressions of Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. And as he passed them, he was taking sensor readings. He was kind of trying to map the planets themselves. It was pretty wild. He's getting a full crash course into this solar system, which they're now getting closer to entering, with Nibiru coming closer and closer towards us and towards our spot in the solar system. So basically what happens now is his ship was equipped with instruments that are able to detect different mineral contents. And with his mind on a possible way to redeem himself and to basically give him more of a push to take back the throne, he scanned these planets looking for this much needed gold that he was looking for. And he's trying to make a name and come back and be like, hey man, this is really something that needs to get done. If I can figure this out, maybe they'll accept me again. Maybe I can get my royal bloodline back in power. And this is if we look at how monarchies or kingships worked on Earth during the Dark Ages, during the rise of Christianity, we see a lot of the same stuff. There's all these different usurpers who try and come in and figure out different ways to make the throne become theirs in ways that are less confrontational, like sabotage, subterfuge, all different types of things. They try and do different things to take the people that are existing in power and get them out. Now, if Alulu was able to get the gold that would save Nibiru, his people would revere him again, and he'd be able to go back to his throne. And right now, he's pretty much an outcast or an outlaw. He's running across the entire solar system like, hey, man, where am I going? What am I doing? So he figured out if he did that, that might be something, that could get him credence back with his people. But when he was passing those planets, there was nothing. There was nothing there for him to use. So using some of the weapons aboard his ship, he managed to blast a passageway through the asteroid belt, right? And through that first bit of the asteroids. The first of his people to do so. Remember, they called the hammered bracelet a very perilous journey. And most mining ships that would go through there would never make it back. I think they went to the asteroid belt once. And when they did that, they basically one ship survived out of like 7, and they sent him back because he wasn't going to go forward with no equipment and no people to help him do whatever he needed to do. And also, they were trying to mine the asteroids themselves, so it was perilous, right? So when he passes this, it's seen as a great feat. So Alulu makes this great feat to pass through the asteroid belt of the hammered bracelet, as they call it, right? So then he passes Mars. It's red and desolate, and also devoid of any significant amounts of gold. And at last, behold, he finds Earth, named Ki or Kai, Ki, by the Anunnaki. The gleaming, it was gleaming like a blue jewel in space. And this is where we now see the Anunnaki coming into Earth and into the lineage of what's happening with Earth, right? Which is pretty wild. I'm going to bring it back to me for a second. So we see that the Anunnaki are basically the 4th race to come to Earth now. Earth is an evolving planet. There are mammalian type species as well as reptilians, some underneath ground, some above ground. There are different Homo habilis type of Neanderthal that are roaming around. They are not the smartest things, but they are there. And so basically, the Anunnaki are now making their way. And if you know where the Anunnaki came from, they were genetic manipulations themselves. So this is what they know. And a lot of during this time of our galactical history, the way that we see treaties play out is two people from different bloodlines either become married and have children, or they create a race of those people to try and take lead and stem the fighting, right? So let's get back into it. So at this point, his instruments started to go crazy as they detected the vast amounts of gold embedded in the crust of Earth itself. So he went closer to the planet and to confirm that his readings and what he was catching was accurate. When he did that, he ended up becoming locked in a pull and push kind of dance with a gravity well, and he wasn't able to pull himself out and went into a gravitational spiral, and then he descended to the surface. So using his mining equipment, he confirmed the presence of the precious metal, and his people so desperately needed it. And it was with visions of redemption and glory that he had in his mind. And this is what he was feeling. He found this place that had gold, and he was like, now I can finally get back what was rightfully his. So what does he do, right? The first thing he does, Lulu sends a message to Nibiru with his ship's transmitters, announcing his great discovery and proclaiming his right to be king once again. Now, we see this a lot. The people come through and they discover things. All of a sudden, it's not the glory anymore, right? It's not about the glory. They think that they've won, and they preemptively go ahead and say, look, I did it. I did it. Now give me back what you said you were going to. And we're going to see that this isn't the case. The people in charge now are like, well, we'll see. So getting back into it. I love stopping at those parts because it shows that these entities had a very, very, very close to human emotion, right? Or very close to the dichotomy of what human emotion is. They feel sadness, they feel redemption, they feel hopelessness, they feel everything. And it begs to show us that even at these heightened states or these extra elevations of consciousness or density, we know that we still get to keep the traits of our human selves because the consciousness is uh, basically it acts in those ways. It sees things in those ways. It comes from that perspective. So to me, that was absolutely fascinating. And just so everybody remembers who Alulu and Anu are, because I see there's a question in the chat. Alulu is the brother or somewhat of a brother, a half brother to Anu. Alulu was the king. Anu had a claim to the throne, so he went after it. They became locked in some sort of like not a battle, but like a will of spirit. And Alulu, who ended up being king for a little while, told Anu that he could be the heir, right? And Anu then said, okay, for a little while, and then they fought to the death, and Alalu lost, but he was never killed. He fled before he could be killed. So, just to kind of get you back up to speed, we're going to see names that I'm going to translate later that are entities that we know of, but they're spoken about differently. The Sumerian names are different than the Akkadian names or the Babylonian names. So I'm going to put some of that into context too. So, and think about it. We're not getting into this development of civilization yet where they start to revere these entities, and we're going to get into that as well. But this is before any of us are really here, right? This is just them and the entities that reside on this planet so far. So let's keep going. So he basically, announced himself king again. And, while all of this was observed with curiosity by the other intelligent inhabitants on Earth, remember, I told you, there's the Knuckles, and there is also the Namalu, right? And there's also the Palladians. So the Knuckles living in their 5D Shambhala and in 4D lower Shambhala, the Namul, the multidimensional guardians of our precious living library, the Ark keepers of the planet Earth, which is almost like a great ark, and the Palladian group who were here living underground. All these groups saw Alalu. They saw him land. They saw him pick up not only, they also picked the communication to his home planet, but also they captured his intentions of his heart, right? And you're going to say, well, why is that? Why does that matter, right? Why does that really matter? And I'm going to tell you why it matters. It's because they discerned that while he was indeed somewhat petty and power hungry individual, his concern of his people was genuine. So they decided to wait and see what played out and not to interfere or make their presence known just yet. And that's a lot of the extraterrestrials that are on the outskirts for right now are going to come into the next episode. They're going to be here on the next one a little bit more. Right now, it's just mostly between all of the Anunnaki, because the Anunnaki themselves have a lot of strife within them, within their factions and within the race as a whole. So let's keep going. So back on Nibiru, upon receiving this momentous communication from Alalu, Anu called together his council, right? And the High Council of well, I forgot to see. I keep forgetting the slides too. I apologize, but we're going to keep up with the slides now. So they discerned that they knew who he was because he was peaceful, right? And that's pretty cool. So back in Nibiru, sorry about that. Upon receiving the momentous communication from Alalu, Anu called together his council. They were inclined to ignore the message from the deposed ruler, saying that it was a farce, saying that he was hiding somewhere on Nibiru. They didn't even know he left yet. So the scientists were brought in to decode the origins of the transmission, and they confirmed that the source was from beyond the hammered bracelet. And the hammered bracelet, again, the asteroid field. They knew he was somewhere else. So upon hearing the general consensus, right, it was that if there was even the slightest chance of this news being genuine, they must act to confirm it. But who would go, right? Who's going to be the one to go on this perilous mission, not knowing if it's a trap, not knowing if there was so much set down? You know what I mean? They could be sending down the king to have the usurped king discard him and come back himself. But so basically what they're doing is they're asking who's going to go. So EA, Anu's son, also known as Enki, right? He's also known as Enki. Let's put that out there. And he's also married to Alulu's daughter, Demkina, right? Stood up and volunteered himself to lead the expedition to Kai, or Ki, however you pronounce it, to find out the truth of Alulu's report, saying that he might be the best one to establish peace with Alulu, given that he was his son in law, right? So now we see the major players coming in, right? We see EA, Enki. And of course, where there's Enki, there's going to be Enlil. And we'll see Enlil come in later as well. And one of the things we see in these stories is that neither one is portrayed as the good guy or the bad guy. What we're seeing is that there's a display of emotion towards each other, not so much on the inhabitants of a planet or what's to come. Maybe that changes later, but for right now, I want to make that relevant because it's important. It's important that we see them for who they are, right? And if just like any other siblings, they are going to fight for power. They're going to try and be the best of the two. That's a sibling rivalry. We have words for that on Earth right now. So it's not beyond the pale that they would see themselves in the same functionality while, being intergalactical, I guess is the best way to put it. So let us keep going. So they find out if the report's true. So, in the answer to the claim of the rightful kingship, Anu decreed that if this report turned out to be true, if Alulu had indeed discovered gold, then Anu himself would travel to Ki himself and wrestle with Alalu once again to see who would be king of Nibiru. So now they're going to give Alalu a second chance to regain his kingship, because they're supposed to be, one of them is supposed to be dead, but they're not. So now that he's found something that could potentially, he could potentially depose Anu because he could save civilization. So of course, Anu, being a king, is not going to take lightly to that. He's going to he's going to take him out. So he kind of wants to do this under wraps as well, because if Alulu did find something, or Alalu did find something, now Anu can take it for himself and grace his family with the love of the people that are on Nibiru, or the Anunnaki themselves. So it's like an intergalactic Game of Thrones, right? That's really what we're looking at here. This is very much an intergalactic Game of Thrones. But my question is, who's Jon Snow? Who's Jon Snow, right? Who's I don't know, somebody else's name, but I thought that would be funny. But it's wild to see this play out, because we see a lot of the similarities to Knights of the Realm and King Arthur's time, and a lot of these entities that we're talking about now can be found within that time as well. We can make, we can do comparative mythology and create timelines. I've done it. That's one of my favorite things to do, is figure out a Sumerian god or goddess and follow their lineage through time and watch how their attitude changes with the encounter of the civilization. Some civilizations, they're feared, some they're revered. What changed in that time to make them different, right? Let's keep going. So now that there's a decision and they transmitted back to Alalu on Ki, after giving it some thought, they decided to agree to this proposal, confident that he would be able to defeat Anu if given a second chance. Right? That's basically, Alalu is confident that he's going to beat Anu this time, but we'll see what happens. This sets in motion a chain of events that would lead to the creation of us, Homo sapiens, about 150,000 years from this time. But we're going to digress, because that's just an added keynote there. So Prince EA, or Enki, and his expedition of 50 fellow Anunnaki have completed their journey to Earth and set up operations there. Aided by Alalu's description of how he blasted his way through the asteroid belt, they armed their ships with what is described in the clay tablets that we see, the Sumerian tablets, as water blasters. So we see that these people are not using lasers, they're not using missiles, they're using water. They're using an element. They're using something that creates and takes away life, right? Which is important. Is a symbol. Not only is it a symbol, we see that because of the life-giving properties and what was going on in Nibiru, there was a big lack of water on that home planet. So where they have to figure out ways to get this water, and water, upon one thing, is one of the, of course, sustainable things in life, no matter what you are. But we see when this specific company of 50 Anunnaki leave to get through that asteroid belt, they essentially have to use a lot of water, right? But you can see that it's actually seems probable that a high pressure jet of water in the vacuum of space could be effective at moving asteroids to move through the asteroid belt. So it makes sense, right? And a lot of their technology seems to have been fueled by water. But whether that was normal water or something else that was referred to as water is unclear. I want to make that I want to make that distinction right now. Because we are calling it water, it also does not mean that it's just regular water, right? And I say that, like water gives life and things like that, but also I want to make that known. I'm assuming it's water, actual water, high pressure water. But they're unclear what that water was. Could it have been mercury, a silver water? Who knows? Who knows what the water was? Nobody does. And that's what I wanted to make that very clear, because we have to be concise when going through this stuff. So now we see that they basically, whatever the case, they their blaster of water worked, for they were able to pass through the journey of the hammered bracelet completely unharmed. But in this effort, they used a lot of that water, right? And upon passing Mars, they noted that the ice caps at the poles and discovered that there were still some rivers and lakes on the surface. After determining the gravitational pull of the planet was not too great as to prevent them from leaving again, just like what happened to Alalu, they landed and restocked their water supply before continuing on their way. Now, I'm going to bring it back to me for a second. Here is where we see things that aren't present today. We know that Mars has ice caps. I just showed you right here. So there is water. But water running on the surface is different. So Mars was in a different position at this time. Mars was in a different state. There were entities there from the Mars and Maldek wars. We know that. And this water that they found, because of the Mars and Maldek war, couldn't have been too fresh. There had to be some particulate matter in there. There had to be some radiation along with it. So they went down there and they grabbed what they could, and then they left immediately. But we see that there's still some foundations of civilization on Mars, which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And again, everybody, please like, subscribe, and share. Let's awaken the world together. Let's get this out. This is important information, even if you don't agree with all of it, to basically intellectualize it and really be a part of what it truly means at a level that's beyond what the capabilities of what we know now. And this is given to us by all these amazing people in this collective. Let's share this out, because something that could be said here can awaken somebody to their truest potential and their truest ability to harness what's within themselves, especially if they resonate with it. So let's do that, right? Also, again, right after this is Watchers Talk. Watchers Talk is doing the Protocols of Saturn. This is chapter 3.1, because chapter 3 has quite a few parts to it. But I believe tonight he's going to be breaking down some of the eclectic Illuminati bloodlines, which is going to be fascinating. I'm excited for it. So make sure we're going to put it in the chat for everybody. I'll post it right now. But make sure that you go there and you subscribe as well, share that out, and also give it a follow and watch it, because it's going to be incredible. It's going to be incredible. So now that we know that Mars was different, it's going to be, very difficult for these people to essentially, and I'm throwing up in the chat right now, is the Protocols of Saturn. You'll see it. It's the link. But we're seeing that Mars had a lot more civilization. It was a cradle of life like Earth was. So let's just keep going from there. I had a side thought, but I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. So now that they've replied, when they got to Earth, they splashed down in the waters of the Persian Gulf and were greeted by Alalu. Now, the Persian Gulf is a particular spot. They say that is the cradle of life around the Persian Gulf, right? Along the Indus River Valley and the Tigris and Euphrates. Those are all homing beacons to the beginnings of our civilization. So they say, right? Just a thought. So over the following months and years, they slowly settled in and explored the area. But the adaptation of their new home wasn't easy. To them, the Earth had insanely short days and year cycles. Remember, these beings come from a 3,600 year elliptical orbit, which means that their years are 300. 1 year for us is 3,600 years for them. So they're seeing this pass in a blink of an eye compared to that. And it starts to make them a little bit uneasy, right? There's a record of the Anunnaki being terrified by the first sunrise they saw, never before having seen the sun appear so huge and red on the horizon, which we hear that in a lot of different places. When in the beginning, in the creation stories of the Iroquois, we see that the first peoples that were peoples watched the sun go down and the moon come up, and they were afraid that they would never see the sun again. So the not knowing of it causes anxiety, right? And it's kind of what we're trying to delineate now. We're trying to not be in the unknown so we don't have those anxieties anymore, and we're working on ourselves to create and create a case around ourselves that says no matter what comes next, we're going to be fine, and empowering ourselves with this information. So so eventually they established the first Anunnaki city called Eridu, or Eridu, right? Eridu is the first city. This is talked about in the Sumerian tablets. This is talked about in the Sumerian kings list. Eridu was the first capital of the Sumerian civilization, right? Now, if the Anunnaki made it and man isn't created yet, then they inherited Eridu. And in the region that is known as Iraq is where Eridu resides. And Alalu was given command of this territory, although for the time being, Enki, or EA, still had command over the whole mission. That's important. Enki has control over the entire mission, but Alalu is in charge of the ground, or the city of Eridu. Right? It's important. I'll pause for a second so we can collect ourselves and get to the next part, because now we're going to be talking about the gold itself. So at the gold extraction, their first idea was trying to extricate the metal from the waters of the region. A much easier process than mining the gold from the ground, and the one that could be achieved solely through the use of machine. But they did not end up with that much gold to show for their efforts, which they needed a lot quick. And it's kind of funny because when I was reading this, I saw pictures of the gold miners that we see today with their pans and the sifting. And it's like, wait a minute, this is very, very similar to what we do now to find the same gold. Now these were technologically more advanced than we were, but it's funny how processes kind of stay the same, right? And we can see where we get all this information from, which shows that their civilizations correlate to our civilizations, which means that basically we are able to take what we know from our predecessors, and these were our predecessors. It just shows links in commonality that most people don't see. So just to point that out. Nevertheless, it was decided that what they have collected should be sent back to Nibiru as proof that there was indeed gold to be had. And so that the efficacy of using Earth's gold as a suspended particulate matter in Nibiru's atmosphere could be confirmed. They had to send the samples back, right, to essentially try and do what they could to make sure that that gold was refined enough to become that particulate matter that blocks the rays and radiation. Now, one of the things I thought about while listening to this was if they have gold in their atmosphere and the sun is coming through, does that make them all look like golden figures or like golden statues? Right? Like, think about it. If the sun is blinding through this gold, is everything that is like, you know how Mars is kind of like a red planet? Is this going to be like the golden planet where everything just looks completely gold or covered in gold? 24 karat dreams over there. But, another joke. Not too funny, but another joke. So let's keep going. So what happens now, right? They have to send this back. So a pilot by the name of Abgul was chosen to fly the gold back to the home planet in Alalu's old ship. And upon inspecting the ship for this upcoming journey, Abgul discovered a couple of nukes in the portable stasis field remaining in the ship's hold. So he reported this to Enki. And together, they hid these weapons of great terror in a cave high in the mountains. After which, Enki, or EA, who wasn't sure of if all of his kin and crew should be aware of this existing weapon, asked Abgul not to tell anybody about the nukes. And this is going to be a tremendous play come later on, right? We're not there yet. So this person, and as we can see, is one of the tablets that they used for mathematics. This pilot was one of the 50. And now there are two people on Earth besides Alalu who knows already about these big weapons of mass destruction. So they want to hide them, want to get them away from everybody. It's probably the best idea, right? So then Abgul returned to Nibiru, where they tested and confirmed that the gold from Earth could indeed be suspended in the atmosphere. They made sure of it, right? So now it's game on. Game on, because now it's all or nothing. And since extricating gold from the water was proving to be too frustrating and ineffective, Enki went looking for a good location to set up a mining operation. He skimmed the land in he skimmed like over land in one of the mining ships and turned its sensors to pick up a trace of that precious metal gold which we were looking for. And they found it in now what is called North Africa. He hit the jackpot. Now, when you hear North Africa and jackpot, and it's deep underground in the vast quantities, and you see that they're close to rivers, what's the first thing you think of? Egypt and the Nile River. North Africa has a crescent fertile valley where gold is predominant down deep into the earth. But you think of Egypt. So now we have Eridu with Alalu, and we have what's going to be known as Egypt with Enki, right? We see things kind of mapping out in how our civilizations are planted and why they're there in the first place. So this gives us explanation. Let's keep going. So now they basically needed something more. They skimmed it, they found a jackpot, and deep underground there were vast quantities. So he returned to Eridu and began the process of transferring men and equipment to the location, which he named Abzu. Abzu. But when you look up, I'm not going to tell you what it means when you look up Abzu, but I suggest you go to DuckDuckGo or Google, whatever you use, type in what does Abzu mean, and you can go to the hermeneutics of what it is. And I guarantee you it will reflectly look at what looks like Egypt, right? It's gonna be very close to what you see pointing all towards Egypt, like I'm telling you. But I want you to go look at that because it'll lead you down another rabbit hole all in itself is the hermeneutics of what we're talking about. So the timing of his discovery was auspicious for Nibiru was passing relatively close to was relatively close to Earth at this time. And Ilu, the heir apparent and Enki's older half brother, had decided to make a trip to our planet to see his little brother and inspect his operations. So the heir apparent comes down to check on Enki, right? And Enki is the kind of person who is essentially trying to prove himself to be worthy to Anu. The older brother comes down. Now, Ilu is Enlil, and we'll see this play out later, but Enlil is the heir and has a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't want to be in the same type of, he doesn't see himself in the same, I guess, context as Enki. But they're brothers, and if one goes, the other one becomes. It's going to turn into this really crazy family feud. But we're going to keep going, right? So upon arrival, Enlil or Ilu was greeted by Ea or Enki with news of the great find in Africa, and he rejoiced and congratulated his half brother. But he was also someone who had trouble taking the back seat, and he started making plans even though the mission was under Enki's command. So Ilu was inspired by the vast amounts of gold underground and had figured that if they were there, then there must be more elsewhere. And he had the idea to establish similar mining camps across the globe. He also had the idea to bring some of the Agigi, the giant worker race of the Anunnaki, to Earth in order to assist. Now, this is where, things a little bit crazy. This is a picture of Enki and Enlil facing each other, right? You can see that they have their watches. They have these crazy beards. One's sitting on a throne. The other one is standing. Hence why, the chip on the shoulder. But now we get to the Agigi, and this is where things get a little bit crazy. So the Agigi are the descendants of the original 12 genetically engineered crossbred children of An or An and Tiamat. They were indeed valuable workers. They had been many interesting mutations in this race over the millennia, both through evolution and genetic manipulation on the part of the Anunnaki, which gave them a great variety of forms. Some had torsos of humanoids, which flowed down into giant serpent bodies instead of legs, or humanoid legs with the many serpent tentacle-like arms. These creatures would become known in Greek myth as the Gigantus, the Cyclops, the 100-hand ones. This is all where we see, and in Egypt, remember in Egypt when they look at the cave walls, and the cave walls, they have these entities with an alligator head, a human body. They had a crane's head, a human body, or it had a human head and a lion's body. This is the variation we see in genetic manipulation. So we're seeing these stories backed up in our ancient civilizations. And that's why when we look at all this stuff, we see these stories being referenced in different cultures, but very similar. And there's a commonness or a commonality to all of the different stories across our planet that give credence to these stories that came way before us, way before we were even a thought in existence, right? But again, I digress. Let's keep going. So now these were incredibly strong, 20 to 30 foot tall and loyal to their masters, and they make them ideal as workers, right? And imagine the vast amount of gold potential available on this planet with this head of dreams of vast mining operations that Enlil got so caught up in, and the plans that he forgot that this is not actually his mission. So he has, I'm going to bring the Agigi down. We're going to make all of these posts across the world, yada, 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 and just glowing with excitement. This isn't his thing to command. It was given to his brother. So when Enki gently asserted that while the ideas were good ones, this was actually his mission, and Lil reacted poorly, obviously. This is a gentleman with a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't like, it's not cool. It's not cool what's happening here. So that's the last slide. We're going to get there in a second. He was, after all, the heir, and having been used to his way being always succumbed to, he still was angry and had a rebuttal of Enki's assertion and said that Enki was out of line, and the argument escalated. It got pretty ugly, but eventually they managed to agree on summoning their father to settle it. And this is where a lot of stuff starts to take to what we know already, right? This next portion is going to be this story of Enki, Enlil, and Anu, right? So, but there's more to this before we finish today. And this was the beginning of a rivalry between these two brothers that would literally grow to biblical proportions. No pun intended, pun fully intended, right? We could talk about it on both sides of it. So the king Anu made his first visit to Earth. Firstly, to determine the role of each of his sons in the new colony, and second, to make good on his promise once again to meet Alalu in single combat to determine who would be the rightful king of Nibiru. Right? So that's all we have in the way of slides. But I want to go into this because we see this dichotomy playing out. And we see that this Anunnaki civilization had plans to go everywhere, all across the globe. They had the ability to do that. So that leads me to ask the question. I want you all to answer in the chat if you can, or whatever you want to do. Do we believe that these entities not only were here, but were in Mesoamerica, were in Japan, China, Australia? Did they achieve their dream of essentially mining everywhere, but also having influence there as well, right? And it really is a wild thought because it could potentially be the answer to so many things. Now, again, this information, if it resonates with you, it's awesome. If it doesn't, I would love to hear everybody else's take on it. None of this is completely confirmed 100%, but this is what we find in multiple works when we look for the common ground, right? And it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. I see something here. Let me read this for everybody. It says, "How should we live? Ask a native on your content as, why have they been oppressed first?" I'm not sure I understand the question. Is that a question or not? I'm not sure. But I know that the native peoples of whether it be Africa Australia, or North America were tapped in. They were handed these stories firsthand from their encounters with races from other planets. And that's how they're so close to living in the next density without actually residing there all the time. And I think that we need to use what we know now to become more symbiotic with our planet, to be more symbiotic with each other, and not in a bad way, not in the way that, be a parasite, in the way that we have to understand and bridge divides that are being placed on us by corrupted factors that are everywhere. There's so much going on with exterior stimuli that it's very, very difficult to know what to take and what to not take. And when you're confident within your internalization and your discernment, you're able to, if it doesn't apply, you let it fly, and you get to this point where nothing can affect you anymore. And I think we all need to elevate to that point and walk within our own truths and figure out what it means to us. Because not only is this a story, and I hope you take it as a story, but I also hope it does something more than that. I hope it shows you the potentials of your internalization and your inner workings. By empowering you with this information, now we can go forth and exponentially change everything within ourselves, but also in the around us. And that's my goal. I'm going to say one more thing, and we're going to shut this down. I was given a mission. Okay, I was given a path by my guides, my creator. My path is an archivist. My path is to go through and make sure that all of this information is documented and left for other generations or the people. You know, it's being left for the people to, if they're ever in a situation of 3D again, can use to utilize, like the cave paintings of the Native Americans. We figure out their stories through those cave paintings. And again, that's my job, is to do that for the next generation, so they get a foot ahead of everybody else. And I see something here. It says, please recheck Enlil and Enki, which was the positive. Neither were good, neither were bad. They were. And that's what we're trying to come to grips here with. They just were. They were acting within the bounds of their civilization. They weren't, one was better than the other. They didn't like each other, right? And they used that to create atrocities. And instead of looking at them as this positive or is this negative, let's look at it as they just were. And people are going to act like that, right? It's not just us. It's everything. It's is it good? Is it evil? It just is. It has the choice to decide that. Free will is not an illusion. Free will is an option, right? It's an option. It's always an option. And whatever you do from that point on is your choice. You can choose to reside within the negative side of things. You can choose to reside in the good of things, or the positive. You can also choose to reside in the gray area. And it's like, the reactionary human condition is fight or flight. I think there's three. I think it's fight, freeze, flight, right? Everything has this, there's a duality, but there's also this gray area in between it, right? So the polarity is not without, nothing is 100% neither way. It's all various shades of gray. And, it really just, it depends on what you decide. And we have to make these choices now, because it's prevalent in our society. We have to make sure that we are taking this stuff and we're using it to create that new earth, that 5D ascension, that whatever you want it to be. Everybody is striving for something different. Just know that you find your path and you reside in it, because what you're doing in that path is going to help others. And then as a collective, we all raise, right? A great conversation we had yesterday was with Vivian Chavez, or Chavez, I might be saying it wrong. The energy of that specific episode was off the chain because of the conversation that we had. She was willing to give us information from her perspective, and were we were greatly appreciative of that perspective, and we took it for what it was, and that's how we move forward. And if there was somebody who was, you know, a different type of extraterrestrial being incarnated into a human body, I would go through the same motions. Tell me what you think. They're all going to vary. Neither one is right nor wrong. They just is, right? And I don't know. That's my thoughts. That's my thoughts. But again, please share this out. Let's awaken this world together. We are the forever students, and we will not be silenced. We will not be put on the shelf. Okay, this is our time. We are the ones that we've been waiting for, and we're going to take that as not just a credo, but as a motto, as a way of living. Right? The information is the activation, as my good friend Phil Gruber says. So let's keep that going. Pass that love forward. Love unconditionally. Help out anybody you can, and let's all hope that we're all moving in the right direction. If not, you have us here, the community, the Forever Student community, to lean on. We're all here to help each other. So, with that being said, my name is Rob Yox. Go to Watchers Talk, which starts at 8:05. Watchers Talk, Protocols of Saturn. We have it in. I'm going to put the link directly into the chat, so you could just jump right there. Everybody have a great evening. We'll be back in a day or two, and I'll speak to you all very soon. My name is Rob Yox. This is Full Spectrum Universe. Have a great night.